everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Deliver Flawless Mobile Apps Faster with CI/CD and CT. Before we begin, I'd like to cover 3 housekeeping items for our viewers. First, at the bottom of your audience console, you'll find a number of widgets for questions and additional resources. When you have questions for the presenter during the webcast, click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webcast, and if we run out of time, we'll get back to you via email. Second, if you need any tech support during the webinar, please use the help option. Third and finally, a copy of today's slide deck is available in the resources section at the bottom of your screen. We will also email you a link to the recording of this webinar within the next few hours. With that, I'll introduce our first presenter today, Eran Kinsbruner, Chief Evangelist, Product Manager, and author here at Perfecto by Perforce. Eran, thanks for joining us on today's webinar.
Thank you, Shelby, and I can say how truly excited I am to be here today, having Brian Reed with me from NowSecure. Before I move to the introduction slide, I have a promise to the audience. We didn't specify, CI, CD, and CT in words. What I promise is that by the end of this webinar, you will understand what each and every acronym CI, CD, and CT means and why they're so important and how Perfecto, together with NowSecure, can actually make both, or actually the 3 of these things, a reality for your organization. So with that, as mentioned, my name is Eran Kinsbruner. I'm a Chief Evangelist and also an author at Perfecto by Perforce. The second book that is on this screen, Continuous Testing for DevOps Professional, was actually done in partnership with NowSecure and Brian. So Brian, I'm happy to have you again here with me. Feel free to introduce yourself.
It's great to be here with you again, Eran. I'm Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer at NowSecure. I've been doing mobile going back almost 20 years, dating back to BlackBerry. These days, now working with organizations who are trying to deliver secure mobile apps faster. I'm excited to be here. It's an excellent topic, and we've created, I think, a really valuable category here to really help organizations think about all the comprehensive nature of testing necessary to deliver flawless mobile apps. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. So in the packed agenda, I must say, that we prepared for you today, we are going to define the importance of CI, CD, and CT and how, why are they so complicated to accomplish, how they fit in the DevOps pipelines, how functional and security testing goes together, especially in the challenging mobile landscape, some common pitfalls and how to overcome them for both functional, but most important in the security, which doesn't get, in my mind today, the massive attention that it requires. And we will definitely leave you with some fundamentals for continuous testing. That's the CT in the agenda today, so you can implement a good pipeline that takes under consideration all different testing types. In some of the slides, we are going to use some statistics from this recent report, the 2020 State of Test Automation Survey. So if you would like to read it more into depth into this survey and get more statistics, this is the URL that you can reach this report. So let's start with, the current market. And Brian, what are you seeing in today's mobile landscape?
Thanks, Eran. It kind of starts with how mobile is now dominating and really driving the global economy. If you look at ComScore data, for example, for the last 2 years, mobile apps have consumed 69% of all digital traffic, which is really 3 times the amount of desktop and mobile websites. And so the current scenario we have with the slowdown in the economy, COVID-19, remote workers, remote users has dramatically exploded the use of business apps and consumer apps for remote consumers and remote workers. And we expect that fundamental step shift is going to stick for the longer term. And so, overall, as mobile drives the economy, right, organizations need to have safe, efficient, effective, easy to use mobile applications to really support what's by default now mobile users. And so as we kind of move on to mobile is dominating the world, then 100% of all mobile developers and 100% of all mobile organizations, of course, want to build really great mobile apps. And of course, they want happy customers, enable their employees, enable their users to really get access to data anytime, anywhere. But what we've seen at NowSecure, and Eran's seen as well, is some of the stats are pretty rough. So our own benchmarks here at NowSecure, analyzing the 4+ million apps in iTunes and Google Play, show that 85% of those applications have security bugs. That's one or more failures of the OWASP Mobile Top 10, and about 77% leak personal data that would violate GDPR or CCPA. Those are some pretty rough stats. What are you seeing, Eran, in terms of the functional testing side?
So I would say, with regards to quality, what we are seeing today, organization, and maybe this also contributes to the stats that you are showing, we are seeing that at the level of test automation perspective, organizations are still struggling to pass the 70-75% test automation. Only 9% of the organizations that we surveyed, could surpass the 75% test automation. When you don't have enough test automation, obviously the scope of testing that you are covering, that also includes security, is very minimal, and this definitely results in an escape defects reality. Some of them are functional bugs, some of them are performance bugs, and some of them are obviously security-related bugs. And by the way, all of these contributes to a very small percentage from a maturity standpoint of organizations that can actually release in a CI/CD kind of continuous delivery method. Only 40% are able to actually release their software daily and with confidence. That the other 85-86% are still struggling with a monthly release cadence. So, sorry. So with regards to, what's blocking? In the previous slide, I showed you 40% of the organization releasing daily, but the majority are still stuck in releasing on a weekly, monthly, and sometimes even bi-monthly basis. What we are seeing that the DevOps reality today is kind of slowed down by test automation. Okay, you can see that coding, building of software is moving as it should. It's being figured out by the DevOps engineering team, by the developers. But when you want to test upon each and every pull request, upon each and every code change, this is when test automation becomes a barrier. A lot of tests are being too flaky and unstable. A lot of manual activities in between these phases kind of hold back the maturity of DevOps and forcing a lot of manual operations, and this slips the release cycles into monthly and sometimes even longer. And at the end of the day, it's not just about the testing, it's all about the innovation and the ability to release innovative features and value to clients much faster. And as Brian, as you mentioned earlier, today digital is the main channel for end users to go. And if you're not able to innovate, if you're not able to address market changes, you are being slowed down. The business is being impacted.
Yes, absolutely. And what's really interesting about this, and part of the reason we're coming together around the notion of CT for testing, is that both the functional test automation side and the security test automation side, both are either competitive advantages in driving innovation or weaknesses that slow organizations down. And so, we're together today talking to you and the audience to help you really think about there are automated ways to really get past this friction and get that process running, the way you would want it to go. So I think we get started, Eran, with what's CI/CD. So CI/CD fundamentally is continuous integration and continuous deployment and delivery, right? So as we think about what's happened for the development and the operations teams, they spent the last 10 or 15 years building out automation, right? There's dozens of companies that have commercial software vendors and some open source tools that deliver CI/CD automation type technology that allows the developer to check in their code, system automatically builds the app, automatically pushes the app through approvals processes, and ultimately into the deployment part. And for most organizations, somewhere in there falls testing. And really the ability of this process to run in a streamlined fashion kind of depends not just on the skill of the developer and the automation of the CI/CD platform, but also depends on the organization's ability to run through the testing cycles in as automated a fashion and complete a fashion as possible. So CI/CD has done great work to advance the role of the developer and the operational team when it comes to building and deploying software. And then there's a few other things around testing that maybe need to catch up to take advantage of this. Eran?
Definitely. And I think one of the keywords that you put in there was automation. So the keyword behind continuous testing, and continuous testing, in my mind, if you want to get the main value of testing within CI/CD DevOps, is having continuous testing as the glue between CI and CD. CD falls in between these two important and advanced processes. But as CI, as Brian defined, is an automated process of after a code was being changed and committed, a build process starts automatically. It's being triggered the same way testing needs to be triggered upon each and every code change. But what kind of testing? Because continuous testing definitely relies on test automation, but it doesn't, and it's not even meant to cover each and every test automation scenario. You want to have a very, very picky methodology around which software test automation scenarios are being executed and triggered upon these CI builds and jobs that are happening multiple times a day per each developer, and also as an integrated build a few times a day, depending on the maturity of the organization. So if you look at the definition of continuous testing, and I underscore the keywords here, you're looking at executing automatically upon each code change the high-value test cases that can obtain feedback or business risks that are associated with these code changes. So if you keep in mind the high-value test cases and their objective to identify business risks, you are able to really implement the automated continuous testing process that comes in between these CI and CD workflows. And when you look at continuous testing that enables these processes, then Ashby, this, I think, for every practitioner in the DevOps testing, Agile testing field, this should be kind of familiar. But this is not a theoretical slide. This should be the reality. You test upon each and every phase, each and every step along the way, and continuously, and this includes not just the functional testing, but the performance, the accessibility, the security, and many other test cases. What's your take on that, Brian?
Yeah, test often, right? So look at what test design strategies, test strategies, automation strategies, incremental strategies right throughout. And I think the nice thing about the kind of approach we're talking about is you're looking at the functional side, the quality side, the security side, the privacy, the side, really all the different risks. And what's great about modern state-of-the-art technology now is it can match this practice. As we'll see today, technology's advanced, much like the CI/CD platforms have advanced. We now have continuous testing technology that, with the automation built in, with the developer and QA and security team enablement built in, that makes it practical to do this, right? And so it's very exciting about ultimately where this can go. And Eran, you pulled a really great chart here around the mature DevOps program. Why don't you walk us through this from the DORA report?
Yeah, I think that, to your previous point on the previous slide, when you are able to automate all types of testing, and when you are able to identify these business risks upon each code change, obviously, if you look at just the elite column in this report, you see the benefits, you see the value that continuous testing, continuous delivery brings to each and every organization. When you have a good oiled machine of CI, CT, and CD, it gives you the ability to deploy as frequent as on demand. You had something happening on your platform, on your product, you can deploy it on demand. You have an outage, you can restore the service in a matter of less than an hour, okay? change failure rates results in 0 to 15%. Okay, if you just want to compare that to the least performing organization, you can see how slow it takes these organizations when they don't implement automated processes like continuous testing, continuous delivery, continuous integration. It takes them, the deployment, it takes them between once per week and sometimes even once per month. Okay, this is night and day of a difference between mature DevOps organizations and the ones that are, just getting started and are aiming towards that goal. This is how good looks like. Okay, if you want to have a CI, CT, and CD workflow that works continuously, because the continuous is the keyword behind each and every acronym here, Elite, that's your benchmark. This is where you want to be. And going back to the reality, we gave you the blue sky and how things should look like. But at the end of the day, if you are not really implementing, everyone is familiar with the notion of shift left your testing and making more testing happen, inside the build process, inside the build cycle. But if you are not able to automate upon each code change, upon each pull request, or even bug fix, and you cannot deploy upon demand or upon every market event can be a new operating system, right? Last week, iOS 13.5 got released, okay? So we need to be very agile in responding to market events. But if you are not able to do so, this is the things that are going to be the outcome. So obviously it will take you more time to fix issues. You will have escape defects to production that results in poor user reviews. It will obviously cost you a lot of money. We know the metrics between finding bugs earlier in the cycle, comparing to defects that are escaping to production, and you need to roll back and understand what went wrong. So when you are shifting left, when you are doing testing continuously, the innovation throughput is obviously growing, and the quality of your output, and therefore the user experience is growing. It's a simple math. So why is it so complicated to reach this 75-80% test automation success rate? And Brian, feel free to chime in as well. What we are seeing in our client base and research that we have conducted, these are the top reasons, I would call them excuses, for automation not being successful. And I'm not just talking about functional testing, I'm talking about any kind of testing. And it starts with automation skill set. It starts with siloed approach, teams that are not really working together, teams that aren't able to automate advanced scenarios, individuals and management that cannot really drive decisions through data and test reports, test environment setup. Application simply is not designed for testability, and there can be even more lack of time to automate. So these are just a subset of the key points that we are seeing that are challenging developers and test automation engineers from reaching the goal of 80 and 85% or even more test automation success rate.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's fascinating and interesting to me, about this whole thing is as both organizations have looked at working with our customer bases, whether it is quality testing or security testing, it's all the same set of challenges, right? You need the right skilled people, you need the right tools, you need to have the processes working the right way. And ideally, the whole reason for coming together around continuous testing, or CT, is to a large extent, testing is testing. Whatever category of testing you need to do, you should be able to do it in parallel. You should be able to do it at a high degree of coverage in a highly automated fashion, and you should be able to do it in a relatively easy to manage from an ongoing process perspective. And that's really what we're seeing is now possible in the market, and why we're talking with you all today.
Definitely, Brian, definitely. So now let's focus on the practical things where NowSecure and Perfecto, with our experience and history with enterprises, see and actually can contribute to you guys online on how to make CI, CD, and CT a reality for your products. And I think we mentioned it, Brian, during this webinar up until now, but I'm just doing a recap of what the Agile Testing Manifesto is all about, and I've marked in bold and sometimes also in green the very important words, if you like. So you do not need to read all the sentences. If you just read the bold text as a sentence, so you understand that Agile testing means you do continuous testing, and I'm emphasizing of all testing activities that gives you value across the team. It's not a one-man show, towards a very high degree of product scenario coverage. So if you read this as a sentence, this is your mantra. This is what can drive CI, CD, and CT across the different personas. Would you agree, Brian?
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm a big fan of the Agile Manifesto itself. Done a great job here of mapping it to the world of testing, right? And much like we're trying to automate the work of the developer, enable the developer to fail fast, enable the developer to do quick incremental coding, additional gains, fast release cycles. We're just trying to bring testing into that, right? With a high degree of automation and efficiency to enable those groups to be successful. So as we move on here, right, it's all about the teams working together. This isn't all a technology conversation. We have the developers, right, and they're taking advantage of a lot of the DevOps capability in their traditional world and really looking to drive that innovation, build cool, exciting new applications, add features that excite customers, add capabilities that, differentiate them versus others and really help them serve that customer need. And along with the developers, of course, you have QA and their testing activities, and you have security and their testing activities. And so this is sort of a classic it takes the village type of scenario where we're trying to help these organizations work together using the process you just saw on the last slide. Let's help all of these groups work together in an organized way to then scale the overall DevOps process as we work our way through this conversation. So when we think about the basic software delivery lifecycle, right, there's lots of different ways to draw this. We've shown an infinity diagram. You can draw a lifecycle diagram. I'll kind of explain the lifecycle, and then I'll hand it back to Eran to have a look at the QA quality and functional testing side. So classic lifecycle, right, code, commit, build, test, stage, deploy, right, rinse and repeat around the cycle. And the goals are very straightforward, right? Everybody wants to deliver high quality software. Everybody wants to use incrementalism throughout that process. They want to be able to bring together the different teams and the different process capabilities throughout this cycle in a uniform way. Everyone's trying to get the best test coverage, the 75% or more automated test coverage, because that's the only way to make this cycle really run fast in efficiency. And that in turn means building the testing itself into the pipeline itself. And that drives efficiency for the overall organization and obviously productivity gains for the particular users or the typical roles that are involved in the lifecycle. So let's have a look at the functional testing side. Back over to you, Eran.
Sure, and what we want to emphasize, while regardless of the platform, this fits to any product that you would think of, but specifically in this webinar, we are focusing on the mobile landscape, and the mobile landscape, unfortunately, it's quite complex. We know for many years that it's a fragmented environment, plenty of changes, a lot of operating system changes, multiple screen sizes and permutations, a lot of environment impacting conditions like cellular, incoming calls, events, and stuff like that, sensors operating in the background. So the environment that we are dealing with for this delivery pipeline or delivery lifecycle is highly complex and fragmented. This is where you want to make sure that you are, in the testing points. We talked about testing at every significant milestone throughout the pipeline. You want to make sure that you are, taking the test pyramid and implementing it across these different phases with unit and smoke testing on virtual and real devices, doing real device cloud-based testing with actionable feedback. You want to make sure that you're testing against the real end user environment and the user conditions, okay? You want to automate the key business transactions at an earlier stage so you can get fast feedback to your developers prior to the major integration and regression cycles. So there are a lot of things that are generic to testing almost any application, but there are also specific points that I wanted to emphasize that are relevant to the mobile space.
Absolutely, and as we look at bringing security testing in, it's the same thing, right? Testing on real devices, testing in real-world scenarios, testing the actual code that you've built. And like functional testing, there are many places where security testing can apply. So, test of the open source code being brought in from third parties that invariably have security vulnerability or versioning issues. Providing IDE plugins and code scanners so that as developers are actually writing code, making sure they're writing secure code as they write it and have them check, behind them as they're writing the code. And then, of course, it's testing the binary itself, your classic QA and security automation occurring post-build of the binary. And that really allows the most complete test coverage. Testing the binary tests all the code once the application has been built and enables you to test it on either iOS or Android, however it's been done. And then you can, of course, throughout this, optimize the speed and velocity of your test cycles as necessary, depending on the risk application, the speed of your pipeline, and all of those kinds of things. One of the other things that's important to consider is monitoring the security and privacy of an application running in production. You want to make sure that you're able to see if attackers are going after it, respond to them. You may have to drive new requirements back into development to add additional coding, defensive capabilities or something as things might be found. So that really goes from requirements and design all the way through production to be successful with security testing. So what I'd like to do is drill in a little bit and talk a little bit more around mobile application security as part of this journey, and then we'll dig in and look a little more at the QA automation and the functional testing as well. And so I'm gonna bang through a couple of components here. I think the first thing is to really talk about mobile app security risks and where are they and how real are they and have you heard about them and are you concerned about them? So all of these organizations, after they were breached, clearly wished they'd paid more attention to security before they were breached. Now, remember the statistics I said earlier were about 85% of mobile applications fail one or more of the OWASP top 10. I'm going to show you a little more on that data in a minute. Over 70% leak privacy data. The reality is all these organizations were moving fast and really trying to innovate quickly, but had not built continuous testing into their infrastructure. Most of them have it now because they have had to respond to the bad experiences that they and their customers had, and in turn refine their Agile and DevOps programs to build testing in so that they can be more resilient, but also protect their enterprise. And so it's out there, and we don't want any of that to happen to you. We did a benchmark study that we update every year where we basically take the OWASP Mobile Top 10 and run the battery of tests automatically against millions of apps in the app stores coming from the iPhone and the Android devices here. And this is all testing real devices at scale in large volume, looking across these 10 OWASP Mobile Top 10 vectors. And you'll see that a number of them, there's very low failure rates. Authentication is great. Generally, platforms used properly. Authorization is strong. Good news there. But what's kind of scary about it is it's all about data storage and data transmission. If you look at the rows M2 and M3, those have to do with data storage on device or data at rest, and then data communication over the air. Nearly half of the applications, that's millions of applications in the app stores, fail because of improper data storage locally or improper data communication over the air. And that's pretty depressing. Now, those things are identifiable, they are fixable, but as a general rule, those are only found through dynamic testing. So oftentimes organizations who focus on static testing of the source code miss the things that can be found that are data leakage in these two areas. You also see a little bit further down, client code quality, reverse engineering, extraneous functionality. There's lots of different things that live in that world. Part of the complexity of building mobile applications often means that developers and testing teams disable certain security elements because of how the iOS and Android devices are locked down just to enable their actual development process or testing process. And then they leave them in and they go into production, and then there's all new vulnerabilities that no one ever attended. And that's worse than hard-coded credentials, or in addition to hard-coded credentials, there's a number of other things we find. So let's sort of think about it from a functional level. So there is a mobile attack surface. That's the way security people kind of think about this problem. And so what are all the exposure points or risk points that bad guys can use to basically attack an application? And if it's a web application, there's a lot of perimeter defense, firewalls, WAF, and everything else in front of the web server. So most of the code is behind that infrastructure and not exposed. In the mobile world, it's very easy to reverse an iOS or an Android application. So essentially, the whole mobile part of a mobile application ecosystem that might also include a cloud-based backend is exposed to the user, but it's also exposed to the attacker. And so we see attacks at the code level. We see attacks at the API backends in the cloud. We see attacks around data at rest. We see attacks around data in motion. We also see accidental failures by developers not properly securing or privately protecting at each of these different levels, because it's pretty hard to write a highly secure mobile app. And so the traditional approach of using static source code testing tools or applying web testing tools versus mobile testing tools mean they see some code stuff, they see some backend stuff, and that's it. And so they're generally left blind. Now, the modern mobile automated testing software that's designed for today's mobile applications actually covers all four of these quadrants. So as you move towards state-of-the-art for mobile application security testing, you'll find this level of coverage, which is really important in terms of protecting your enterprise. And so when you look at a technology like NowSecure, for example, we're experts and specialists in mobile application security testing. We combine at the binary testing level, testing on real devices, we combine static testing, dynamic testing, and interactive testing, and it's all 100% automated. So literally, you pass the file in, we run the test, you get the results back. And by combining these three types of testing in an automation harness, that allows us to test for the code and the APIs and the data at rest and the data at motion, all in a single platform, so that you get that high degree of coverage and confidence and the accuracy that you've actually been able to address the issues that are potentially in your product or in your application that you don't want to escape into the wild. Now, using a technology like this is great because it's a SaaS platform, runs in the cloud, API-driven, connectors to third-party DevSecOps tools, the ability to upload applications on demand, what have you. It's kind of a 1, 2, 3 sort of orchestration. So submit the binary. Binary's loaded on a real device, tests on a real backend device in a cloud, runs a full battery of tests in about 15 to 20 minutes, and then generates the output that then gets routed where it needs to go. So whether you want reports routed to various stakeholders in the team, or in a DevOps scenario, basically you want tickets routed back to the developer, they now get a ticket that identifies this app has this one or more specific vulnerabilities or security issues or privacy issues. Here's where it is. So here's what you need to fix. Here's recommendations on how to fix it. So they can then do that fast feedback loop and quickly address those issues. And so this 1, 2, 3 process can be run kind of in an on-demand mode, or it can be run in a fully automated mode plugged into a CI/CD infrastructure. So as we talked about early, the whole notion of CI/CD for continuous integration, continuous delivery and deployment, here we've got more than half our customers are running us plugged into something like Jenkins or Azure DevOps, Circle CI, what have you, and then feeding tickets into Jira, Azure DevOps ticketing systems or otherwise. And so what you now have is a largely autonomous system that allows you to test every build every single day, automatically generate tickets, and process this through. The level of work for the QA automation engineer, security engineer to set this up will vary depending on the complexity of the application. But what's great about it when we look for a percentage testing coverage is you can get 70, 80, 90% automated test coverage from a security perspective, which really helps you achieve that nirvana around continuous testing as part of your CI/CD environment. So Eran, I want to hand it back to you to take us forward on where we go with continuous testing.
So before I go to this, I just want to ask you a question as a security expert. So when you are scanning and running the application, based on your experience, and you cover the common pitfalls, the top OWASP common pitfalls, are you seeing specific issues that are happening on, Android devices or specific Android devices and are not happening on iOS? Are you seeing cross-platform deviation with regards to escape defects or defects that you're finding?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there are some distinctive differences. One of my fun things to do when I have a stage presentation is do a show of hands question on the following. Which operating system has a higher likelihood of application vulnerabilities of a certain class? And I ask the different classes, people respond. And what we found is that from a data in motion perspective, meaning from a network communications vulnerability perspective, iOS applications tend to have a higher rate of defect. It is harder to create a secure communications channel, properly use SSL, and manage certificates on iOS is harder than Android. Therefore, we find more vulnerabilities there as a general pattern. Flip it around from a data storage perspective and data protection perspective on the device, Apple has such a strong containerization model that we find fewer data storage issues on the Apple devices, but because of because of Android's more open and sharing environment, we find more data storage issues or data leakage issues, typically on Android devices. The other difference we tend to find is around obfuscation. Apple has built-in DRM that will automatically harden an application. Google does not. So for Android developers, we strongly recommend, in addition to advanced testing, they also leverage third-party code or tools to obfuscate or harden their application to reduce the chance of reverse engineering their code.
That's perfect, and this just re-emphasize your point from earlier that you actually need, the full types of testing: static, dynamic, interactive, specific test cases that are running on both platforms, because they do behave different and they do have different common pitfalls. So thank you for clarifying that. This is really important.
Absolutely.
So let's see how you can really build a pipeline for continuous testing that really takes under consideration all of the testing types as the Agile Manifesto guides us. So there are few phases in marching towards continuous testing. Everything in life, you want to start small, make it stable, and then build on top of that. Because when your infrastructure, when your foundation is flaky, everything else that you are building on top of obviously will fail. So you want to start, and by the way, this is where the State of Test Automation report comes into play, because this is where we found out that the majority of organizations, over 80% of the organizations, are not really passing the 60% test automation success rate because of flakiness, skill set, prioritization of test case scenarios, maintenance of test automation, incorporating test automation into the CI/CD pipelines before they are really, I would call them, certified to be successful and valuable. So when you look at these 5 phases of maturity, up until, at least you reach the 3rd phase, which is the entry point to the DevOps friendly zone, as we call it in Perfecto. So you want to start with a stable automation of test creation, maintenance, that you can really get some basic trust in the core scenarios that you start running, even before they are embedded into your CI. Okay, for that you need a skill set matching tool. Okay, if you are mismatching the test automation framework, which is, let's say, C# based, but your higher test automation developer skill set is in Java, there is a mismatch. If you are selecting a framework that doesn't really provide all the supported capabilities that your test engineer are looking for, you are mismatching, and obviously you are not going to build the right framework to go forward with. So you want, in this first phase, to establish a good foundation of test automation that matches the skill set, that covers not just one device, but actually few devices, not just from a functional perspective, we just heard Brian, but also from a security perspective. You want to make sure that all of the testing types, even a small subset of them, are running on more than few devices, to gain the confidence that you have built a good framework with high valuable test cases that then you can include in your daily cycle, which is the 2nd phase of maturity, where you get a very good, I would say, results in this case in minutes, with fast feedback loops, but these are test cases that you can already trust. And if there is a fail, it's not a false negative, it's a real failure, it's a real bug. To be able to be in this phase, you need a very robust environment, a lab. Brian mentioned the cloud. So with Perfecto, we are providing you across platform, device, but also browsers, cloud in multiple geographies with all of the real environment conditions, so you can build test automation in the real world. For that, you also need a process integration. You need this lab to be integrated into your CI pipeline so you can execute everything at scale from your own processes and environment. Once you mature this daily cycle, then you reach the DevOps friendly zone. And this is all about increasing scale, visibility, fast feedback, advancing more scenarios, baking more scenarios into your pipeline so you can reach up to 95%. And think about it, we're not talking about 95% of everything that you can think of. We're looking at 95% of high valuable test automation scenarios that can really, give you high confidence in your application quality. To be successful in continuous testing, and I think Brian mentioned it earlier, you do need all of the personas. You need a village, and you need a village so you can actually mix the people, the processes, the technology towards the same goal. And this is how you work with the business analysts, the developers, the UI designer, the security engineering team. So they are part of all the different phases of the pipeline continuously. It's not a one and done. It's done continuously on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, upon each story point and feature request. John Ferguson Smart, this is the reference of his diagram that we took to emphasize the point. Anything to add on that visual from your end, Brian?
So I was on mute there. So, again, it does take the village. And what we found is that the organizations that are most successful bring the teams together and look at the process elements, right? One of the other important things that you bring up is this notion of visibility throughout the workflow, right? So visibility comes from the tooling you choose. It comes from the metrics you choose, how you track those metrics, how each team has a sense of what's going on and enabling them to capture that feedback and in turn drive not just continuous testing, but really continuous improvement throughout that cycle. So we really now have a world where you have development, QA, and security all working together throughout these different steps.
Definitely. And what we have done up until now, we described many types of testing running, being built towards a very solid foundation. We deep dived into the security aspect of mobile applications. We learned that it's not as easy as you may think. This is where companies and vendors like NowSecure comes into play and makes it simple and continuous for you to obtain security, functionality, confidence, so you do not really get to the points like Brian was showing you, such as multiple organizations that were caught with security glitches and stuff like that. So this is the right time to look into an example pipeline, and in my mind, this is how a good pipeline should look like. If you go back to the slide from Dora in the elite column, this is, in my mind, an elite pipeline within a DevOps process. When you look at so many pull requests coming from engineering that can obtain feedback up until 10 minutes, okay? Upon each commit of a pull request, you get in 10 minutes the valuable feedback through unit testing and some other smoke or regression testing that gives you the confidence that nothing was broken. What you intended to change in the code served its purpose. Later on in the day, the pipeline allows you to run something which we can refer to as a noon build. It's a feedback that you run for 1 hour which takes a subset of high valuable smoke or regression testing. But this is where, all the things that Brian was talking about earlier, when you mix the functional, the API, the integration, components, security testing, all of these test cases can run in 1 hour through a trigger. It's done daily. And the high value of these test cases is not just that they are able to give you confidence, they are the foundation to the later on in the day, the full regression cycle that runs overnight up to, 8 hours, but gives you the wider coverage of both test cases, platforms. We talked about different Android and iOS devices. This is where you do regression only on real devices against different environment conditions, with different security policies, with different network conditions and stuff like that. So you get the mix of all the tests that were kind of a smoke or a subset in the 1 hour feedback towards the full degree. You get a very massive regression suite that when you go back in the morning, the day after, you really, if you got some failures, you nail them, you know about them. And in my mind, and based on the experience with one client of mine that actually uses this methodology, when you are doing it on a daily basis, like a machine, as continuous testing should look like, you're not really being surprised that often because, you are on top of things. This gives you a full framework of control over quality that, a lot of things will not slip when you're operating in that regards. What's your thought about that, Brian, about this method?
I think it's a great method, right? If you go back to the practice of incrementalism, along with the notion I talked earlier from a security perspective about testing at multiple points throughout the cycle, right? So layering security into this, not only would you do a smoke test, a build and regression test, you'd actually do a source code test as part of the development cycle to make sure that the code, to reduce the chance that the code's being written at the developer level in an insecure way. And then testing at each of these stages with security along with functionality really helps you reduce the defect chance for sure.
Totally. So if you want to take a few things from this webinar, you definitely got from Brian a few of the common pitfalls in mobile application security across different platforms, the types of security testing that you want to conduct, and how NowSecure can help you. You learned about the testing of different testing types in the cloud with Perfecto, implementing them and integrating them into such kind of a stable pipeline. So this is also a very good, in my mind, insight and takeaway from this webinar. For those of you online, because we are reaching the end of this webinar and we want to leave some time for questions, I would like to give a very short brief into what is Perfecto and what's the Perfecto continuous testing platform solution all about. So Perfecto is a cloud-based environment for testing on both real mobile devices, virtual devices, as well as desktop browser permutations like Chrome on this Windows machine, Safari on Mac OS, and stuff like that. We have a cloud-based environment in 11 data centers with a range of over 10,000 real smartphones and tablets, as well as virtual platforms. We are open and integrated, and this allows us to integrate with the variety of DevOps toolchain, from test automation frameworks to test execution environment to CI/CD like Jenkins, Bitrise, and many more for creation and orchestration of testing. At the end of the execution, what Perfecto is providing is a very smart reporting and analytics platform that consists of heat map, root cause analysis that are baked or managed through a machine learning algorithm, so you can really get a segmented report based on failure root cause analysis. It can be an element that wasn't found, can be an exception, can be a device issue, but we are classifying the failures automatically upon your test execution in the cloud. You can also compare with Perfecto across different platforms the execution and how it looked like from a visual standpoint on this smartphone and this tablet across different devices and operating systems. We are providing the same-day support for all mobile OSs and platforms, starting from the latest iOS to the latest iPhone and Android. So we are always on top of the platforms for both mobile and web. So to summarize, we are a continuous testing solution that supports the full life cycle of creation, execution, analysis, and also any training and black belt expertise that you may think and need. Perfecto can provide it to you. We recommend that you go to the perfecto.io website and learn more. You can actually go and subscribe to the free trial if you like and get hands-on experience with the platform. But at the end of the day, we are combining all of these 4 pillars for continuous testing in a single solution. So with that, Shelby, I would like to move to the Q&A portion of this webinar. So let's see what questions do we have.
Thank you very much. Yes, I believe our first question asks, we use source code security scanning with our devs. Dynamic security testing has been manual. How are you able to do dynamic testing in an automated way? What do you miss compared to manual testing?
Oh, so that's a good question. We often get a SAST versus DAST type question when it comes to automation. Traditionally, it's been incredibly difficult to automate dynamic testing because the nature of dynamic testing is you have to actually run through the application or the website. And something really interesting has happened in web versus mobile. In the web world, it's incredibly difficult to do automated dynamic testing, but in the mobile world, it's actually easier to do dynamic testing. And there's technical reasons for that I won't dig into today. But effectively, we built an automation engine that's resident on the real device that actually drives the application through the testing process. Much like Perfecto automates the testing process from a functional or UX perspective, we drive the application through a series of clicks and a series of tests in order to automate that dynamic process. And what's great about it is, because of the way most applications are written, by just simply loading the application in our dynamic engine, we'll find a lot of low-hanging fruit. And then using a threat model to determine which are the high-risk portions of the application, it can then run through it. So logging in, doing a shopping cart transaction, retrieving confidential information, creating a new account. Those are typical scenarios where PII or other very sensitive information might be necessary. We've seen millions of applications, so we know how to negotiate or navigate through those things. And so what winds up happening is our best-in-class customers will use static source code scanning from another vendor to really help the developer write good code, sometimes with like an IDE plugin that's like a spell checker. And then they'll use an SCA product to check their open source, and then they'll use NowSecure for static plus dynamic at the binary level in the build cycle to give them that complete coverage of everything they haven't seen so far in the early testing stages.
Great, Brian. Thank you. Shelby, any other questions?
Yep. The next question asks, are these 2 products integrated? Does the NowSecure testing run in parallel to Perfecto, or do they run separately?
That's a good question. I'll take first piece, and Eran, please add. So we're not directly integrated with each other. We have a number of common customers who run us either in parallel or serialized in their environments. Right, it very much depends kind of on their testing strategy and the way QA, security, and development are organized. So some will run them in parallel, some will run them serialized. The great thing is both of them can be launched post-build to do full-blown testing as necessary. Eran, anything to add?
I think that you covered it correctly. Specifically, upon the build, which includes the security aspects of testing, you can definitely target your full cycle, including the security, in parallel in the Perfecto cloud. So while there is no specific integration between the products, there is a feasible way to run both functional and security testing in a single execution in the Perfecto cloud. And if you are online interested in learning more about that, we can definitely take it with you offline and address that.
All right. Our next question asks, what's a good practice to combine per software build, functional, and security testing? What's the right mix?
That's a good question. I'll take it and let Brian also comment, because I think that's a common question. I think this is at the core of this webinar. So if we go back to my slide on how a good pipeline should look like, I think this should be my response to this question. Basically, each feature request, each pull request, each code change will have its specific, impacted areas. So I wouldn't run a full-blown regression per each code change, but definitely upon specific code changes that are touching sensitive areas within the cycle. And in the pipeline, I gave at least 3 stations a day for testing. The first one is upon the pull request itself. The second is during the noontime when you are running a 1-hour feedback cycle, and the regression, the nightly regression. So depending on the sensitivity of the changes, you would determine, because it's not on a daily basis that you're running the exact same suites over and over again. There are always subsets and supersets of these suites that correlate to the changes that you are making to your code. So on a daily basis, you would fine-tune each and every suite to include more security testing, less security testing, more UX and performance versus API or functional. So it's not a one and done. You want to fine-tune and customize your suites based on the scoping of each daily code changes.
Absolutely. I mean, incremental code testing is really the best way to go. In studies with our customers, the ones with the fastest innovation cycles, and generally correlating to the highest revenue growth for the business, by the way, or application usage growth, generally comes from testing every build every day, right? So incremental code that's written every day should be tested every night, come back the next day, and so on and so forth. We have a few extreme customers that do multi-test per day, meaning they actually build, test multiple times in a cycle. These particular organizations are global, for example, so they may have master code that's being compiled with certain feature flags for certain countries and then released in country 1 in the morning and country 2 in the afternoon. So there's lots of different ways that you can configure and run your CI. And really the key here is, again, that incremental testing of the incremental code every day, whether it's functional testing or security testing. That's really how you get the quality bar you need.
Definitely, definitely. Shelby, let's see if we have one more last question before we wrap this up. Do we have time for one more?
Sure. Question is, does NowSecure integrate with Azure DevOps?
Well, that's a good question. So I did show a picture that had Jenkins and Jira. It's kind of hard to put every CI on the platform. We integrate with about 20 different systems. We have a lot of Azure DevOps customers and the old Microsoft Teams server, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're happy to work with those organizations. We can also test Microsoft-generated code from their tools, so Cordova and some of the other intermediate languages as well, because we're testing the binary code.
Definitely. And Brian, to your point, Perfecto also has an integration with the Azure DevOps pipelines, portfolio, not just Jenkins and the others. So for any customer who is using Azure DevOps with NowSecure, we can definitely tap onto that and provide a more comprehensive end-to-end continuous testing solution. So with that, Brian, I had a great time. As I anticipated, I would like to thank you for the great insights and content that you provided us today during this webinar. And to all of you online, I would definitely really like to appreciate you joining us. I'm sure that there are many other questions, and we'll try to get back to each and every one of you after this webinar separately. But with that, I'd like to conclude the webinar. And again, Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a great day.
Thank you.